You're listening to the A Bit From Within podcast with Felicia Marty. It is much easier to go with the flow when we're actually taking care of our own needs and wants. When I think back to my life, all of the things that I've just worked out when I've just gone with the flow, it makes me so much happier because I'm like, I didn't have to do any work in order to have those things happen. I mean, I had to participate. You can't just do nothing, right? You have to participate, but you don't have to overthink it. And usually when you do that, it turns out better than you can imagine. Hello there, and thank you so much for joining me today for a new episode of the A Bit From Within podcast. My name is Felicia, and for those of you who are new to listening, every week I'm here sharing a little bit from within. I started this podcast a few years ago because I knew that if I could even share just a little bit of something real for me, either something I was going through or thinking about or feeling, navigating, trying to process in my own life, that it would likely resonate with somebody else out there. And my goal through sharing a little bit from within is that you're able to find either some comfort in being able to relate to the crazy things that I'm going through, or maybe you find a new idea or a good takeaway. Maybe it helps give you some encouragement to do what you need to do, permission just to know that you're not alone, or permission to take a break or a rest, or even to find the courage to do something about something that you've been going through. Every week is a little bit different. And this week, I am specifically going to be talking about going with the flow. Have you ever been told just to go with the flow? Actually, it's kind of funny. I didn't even really totally connect this until exactly this moment. But you guys, if you've been around a while, you know that I love TikTok. I'm on TikTok. It's such a fun platform. But on TikTok, there's this funny trend going on right now. It's the sound that's like, I would love to go with the flow, but what time does the flow start? And is there parking there? Is it self-parking? What time are people showing up right at 2:00? Or is it show up a little bit early? Or do we wait for other people to arrive and show, it's kind of funny because so many people can relate to this idea that going with the flow would sound so easy, right? Like whenever I picture going with the flow, I picture like being in one of those, what's it called? Like a lazy river, just hopping on a little raft and just going with the flow. You don't have to worry about anything. You could just drink your drink, stare up at the trees, maybe the sun coming down through them. It sounds so nice. It's like you don't have to do anything. And yet so many of us need to feel prepared, need to feel helpful, want to participate in the process, or even feel a ton of pressure and responsibility to actually fortify the path in front of us. So instead of going with the flow and being in the river, instead we have put ourselves on this trail and we are trying to clear all the brush and we are trying to tell people to go this way and take this path up this hill to go right here. It's like we are just so in it. And usually when we feel that way, it is because we have put a ton of pressure on ourselves. We've got high expectations. We want to feel really safe and secure. Maybe we have grown up or experienced a lot of inconsistency in our life, and that has caused us a lot of pain or confusion. And so we don't want anyone else to go through that. And so we try to be as clear as possible. We overthink things. We really, really try to do everything we can to make it as clear as possible so that it's the least painful, right? But what sometimes ends up happening is that we end up overthinking things in a bad way or over-controlling or finessing things to this point that it is too much, that we've exhausted ourselves, that we've given no room for any spontaneity. And instead of being able to be relaxed and allowing things to happen as they should, instead we're too far in it. And then we don't have any acceptance over what happens because we've already decided what must happen, how the whole thing needs to go. So this is not a great thing. And most of us know this, especially people who have been people pleasers a lot of their life, or have codependent tendencies, or really feel a need to be in control. We know that even though we have the best intentions, that a lot of the time we are dealing with things changing or things not working out how we hoped, and we're sometimes disappointed, or sometimes we are exhausted, or sometimes we're griping with, why did it turn out this way when I worked so hard for it to be a different way? And instead of being relaxed and accepting, we're stuck and we're stressed. So this is the heart of today's episode. I'm going to be sharing a lot about some of the ways I've found it easier for me to go with the flow as a person who is definitely not the queen of that, which is why I think it's a good thing, because if we were just to listen to somebody who is naturally good at that, of course we could pick up some things, but for those of us who really struggle with this, it's good for us to share with each other what works for us. I'll give some examples of times that I haven't gone with the flow and it's kind of bitten me a little bit, and ways that I found myself being able to relax, and also share some of my own real experience on how sometimes, especially when I'm really, really working on going with the flow, how sometimes that actually causes me to feel a lot of big emotions come up. So I'm going to get into that and a lot of the heart of that. But first, at the beginning of every podcast episode, I like for us to have a moment to talk about what's happening astrologically. Because when we kind of have a little basic awareness of what's happening astrologically, we can kind of open our hearts up to different ways to work with the energy of the stars and the sky, the moon, and give ourselves a better chance at just thinking of things from a different perspective. Sometimes we can try it out. Sometimes it will really make a big difference in your life. Or if anything else, it'll just be like, that's interesting, and you can move on from it. I always say that because when it comes to astrology, usually people at least always have one ear open. I think astrology is a topic that's becoming more and more popular, and it's something that almost everyone has an idea about. Some people are very like, I don't believe in that, and that's fine. You can still listen to this. A lot of the time when we're talking about astrology, we're also talking about themes that can, of course, integrate into your own personal growth. But I know a lot of people out there are so fascinated and find astrology so curious and interesting, intriguing, and love these little tidbits of information. So that is part of why I love to share a little bit of what's going on. So, a couple of big things to note. It's kind of a big week for things happening astrologically because we have a Mercury retrograde that begins tomorrow. And then this weekend, we have our full moon and lunar eclipse in Scorpio and Gemini. So the moon is in Scorpio, the sun is in Gemini, and it is a lunar eclipse. Now, I talked more about this last week and the week before that because eclipses always happen in pairs. So the first, the new moon we had 2 weeks ago was also an eclipse. And then this is kind of the end of that pair. So it kind of began 2 weeks ago. It's going to be closing this weekend. This is happening in the signs of Taurus and Scorpio along this axis. And so there's probably a lot of energy going on in this weekend. Now, I won't repeat myself for those of you guys who have been listening the past couple of weeks. I'll just remind you that anytime that we're having eclipse energy, that this is enough going on, that we don't need to do a big full moon ritual or a new moon ritual. We don't want to be charging our crystals during this time. We don't want to be harnessing any of the kind of crazy power that is going on energetically with the moon, because eclipses are such big moments of unexpected, unpredictable change coming into the world. That if we were to harness that, we would be potentially harnessing a lot of that unpredictable, maybe chaotic a little bit energy. It's very big. We don't necessarily want that because it's very unstable to be moving or working with that energy. So instead, and if you are new to working with lunar energy or even paying any attention to the lunar cycle, then this is a awesome one to get started on because you're going to do nothing. You're going to carve out some sacred time, whether it is 20 minutes, if that's all you have. And this is happening on Sunday, May 15th. You're going to carve out some time. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's an entire evening to do nothing. And I don't want you to be bummed out by that, because a lot of people who get very excited about working with the moon, they want to do something. They want to have some kind of ritual. They want to light candles and bask in the moonlight and all of those things. And instead, I just want you to give yourself this as a full permission slip, just to chill and maybe just process what's happening in your life right now. And maybe you're thinking like, I chill every night, Felicia. Like, I want to be able to do something different. Well, then don't treat this night like every other night, right? Like, don't chill in the way that you always do that. Don't relax in that way. If you never take a bath, then this is going to be your night to do that, especially because the moon is in Scorpio, and Scorpio is a water sign energy. So if you want to incorporate a little bit of water, that would be kind of fun. If you have a hot tub, maybe go out in the hot tub this night. You could make a cup of tea, and instead of curling up and watching a movie, which if you want to do that, that's totally fine. But maybe you take your first 10 minutes before you watch your movie, and you curl up and you just have your journal in your hand and you just write out some thoughts that are coming to you. Or you don't even have to do that. You could literally just sip your cup of tea, enjoy the flavors, enjoy the smells, and let yourself decompress. And this is just, it's perfect timing in so many ways, because like I said, eclipses are a time we just need to sit back and allow things to happen anyway. But the other reason I think this is a cool time for this in particular is because we have this Mercury retrograde that begins tomorrow. And Mercury retrograde, well, one, it has a very bad rap, especially it's becoming more and more mainstream to talk about Mercury retrograde. It's not scary. I just have to remind everybody that it is not scary. Sometimes Mercury retrograde has a reputation for things going wrong. But also, I don't know about you guys, but in my life, Mercury doesn't have to be in retrograde for things to be going wrong. Sometimes it just happens anyway. But I always say that when Mercury is in retrograde, it is a good time anyway just to slow down. And part of the reason why is because Mercury rules so many important processes. Mercury controls or kind of governs over communication, coordination, thinking, ideas, personal communication, technology, because we communicate through technology a lot, especially with ideas, words, plans. Mercury also governs or analyzing things, grouping things together, making sense of things, understanding things, making decisions, technicalities. And this is conscious stuff and unconscious stuff. It also governs travel and being able to obviously plan your travel, coordinating either taking off or landing, or where you're going to depart from, or what's going to happen along the way. So there's a lot of things that could get redirected during a Mercury retrograde. And this isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes we have to be redirected in order to come to the place we actually needed to be in. People always say that, like things happen at the perfect timing. Like if I wouldn't have had to run back to my house to grab this thing, then I would have missed seeing like this rainbow in this exact same spot, 30 minutes later when I actually got there. Sometimes things really do depend on timing. And so anytime Mercury is in retrograde, which is about for 3 weeks at a time, about 3, sometimes 4 times a year, especially if the first one is in the very beginning of the year, sometimes the year will end with one as well. It happens about every 3 months or so for 3 weeks at a time. And during these 3 weeks, there's a couple of best practices. A lot of people will talk about what not to do during a Mercury retrograde, which I've talked about that before too. But instead, I just want to talk about a couple of things to do during a Mercury retrograde. And that is, whatever you're going to do it slowly. Like just really think about things. This isn't a time to like act on your impulses. Like if all of a sudden, you're like, I think I want to go buy a new car. I'm just going to go out to the dealership, sign up, and just do that. this is probably not a good time, because sometimes what happens is when you make quick impulsive decisions during a Mercury retrograde, you'll find yourself in a position where things get undone and you actually have to backtrack and refigure things out, especially when it comes to like contracts, travel plans, big decisions, especially things that need a lot of coordinating and organization and analysis. The other thing that is just really good to do during a Mercury retrograde is whatever you do plan on working on or executing, you're just going to do it with a lot of intention and really think through every part of the process. Because Mercury controls communication, this is a time when you really want to think before you speak. So instead of just jumping right into that hard conversation with somebody, maybe you write a letter first and really get clear about how you feel. Because who knows, like maybe once you do that, you realize, actually, if I would have told them this wouldn't have been as good for us, because I needed to have this revelation before I actually presented this to this person. And that could be, in your personal relationships, that could be in a professional setting as well. And another really good tip, and I think this is good all the time, but especially during a Mercury retrograde, is just give yourself extra time. This is not the time of year that you want to be planning like back-to-back meetings, because if something goes wrong technologically wise, or a meeting gets mixed up or whatever, if you are stacked all day, well, it's not really the end of the world, but that first meeting is going to have to be rescheduled, right? Or rearranged. Your whole day is going to be rearranged. So if you give a lot of extra time, you kind of create more space for things to be a little bit more fluid. And then finally, it's also a really good time of year to look at the things that are unfinished business. So whether you have unfinished projects or plans, or whether you've had certain falling outs that you want to go back to and kind of try to fix, or if there's something that you have been working on that your attention was taken away from, these are wonderful times to go back to those things and actually pick up where you left off and complete what you started. So no need to be afraid of Mercury retrograde. Of course, if you are interested in this, there's so much information online. You can continue to find out more. But if I could give you any piece of advice, it's really just to, I suppose, go with the flow, which is much easier when you give yourself all that space and time. You're almost like you're on Big Brother, like you're expecting the unexpected, and it's because of that you're making preparations for it. So obviously, this talk that we're about to have on going with the flow is going to go hand in hand, something that will be hopefully very supportive for you as you move through the next few weeks that Mercury is in retrograde. And like I said, this happens all the time. This is not a rare event. It is not a crazy thing to happen. It's a natural part of, and like the energy of the world. It's okay to have to go back. It's okay for things to get undone. It's okay to slow down. It's okay if things don't work out the first time. None of those are bad things, although for some of us, they can be extremely frustrating. So let's take a quick break and then we'll dive into the heart of today's talk. So going with the flow. How many of you have been told, just go with the flow? Just let things happen. It'll all be fine. It'll all work out. Usually when I think those of us who are being told to go with the flow, it usually creates a very visceral reaction inside of us, because when we are already stressed, when we are already in that state of wanting to kind of control or force an outcome, being told to go with the flow feels impossible. Right? Like we are already working so hard to accomplish something or to create an experience that the idea of going with the flow basically means it feels the same as somebody telling us like, give up. You're never going to get what you want. So just give up and accept a different outcome. And this is really hard for a lot of us because sometimes, like I mentioned, I don't think that any of us who struggle with going with the flow do it in order to have a bad time. Right? Like when we are trying to control things, it's actually with the best intentions in mind. We're either trying to make it an easy experience for ourselves. We feel like if we are able to know what to expect or know what we're going for, that we're able to show up better, more fully, that we can be more confident and self-assured. But the truth is like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is that a lot of times what we think is helping us is actually hurting us. And a lot of times it's not even big things. Like, for a very, very silly example, my sister is staying with us right now. She is on a trip. She lives in Florida and she's here visiting. And so the other night she was sleeping in the living room, and I told her I was going to let the dog out and we're going to kind of wrap things up and go to bed. And when I walked in from taking the dog outside, she was like, "How do you turn this light off?" And she was like struggling with our little end table light. And right as I walked in, she turned it off. And I was like, "You need to turn that back on." And she's like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Because it's connected to a light switch and I don't want it turned off at the base because then we can't turn it back on later." So she flipped it back on, and I said to her, like, "Wouldn't it have just been easier to like mention it when I came back in? Because then I could have just hit the light for you on the wall and you wouldn't have even had to have moved and it would have worked out for you." Now, of course, like, again, one, this is a silly example. Two, how would she have known that I would have come in and turned the light off for her? I mean, I already had the past couple nights, so there's that. But in her defense, like, how would she have known, right? She was trying to be proactive and self-sufficient and not need to ask me to do something that she felt like she should do for herself. So I totally get that. And on the other side of the coin, if I was more willing to go with the flow, I could have just let her stay with the light off. She would have crawled back into bed. And then the next day, whenever we needed to turn the light on, I could have turned it off from the base, and it would not have been a big deal at all. And I will say, this idea of, is it that big of a deal, is one of the biggest things that helps me to practice going with the flow, because I struggle with it. And I'm trying to get myself to this place where I ask myself more often than not, what is the path of least resistance here? So another kind of small, simple example. You're driving down the highway. You've got some other drivers in your car, maybe somebody in your passenger seat, somebody in your back seat, and you're just driving along. You feel good. Nothing is going wrong. And all of a sudden you've got your backseat driver, "Oh my God, you're following this car way too close. You need to slow down, like, give some space." And what is usually the first reaction? I feel like most people as the driver are like, "It's fine. I'm fine. I'm not following too close. I know exactly what I'm doing. I drive myself everywhere all the time. I've got this. I don't need your help telling me what to do." So instantly there's this idea of like, you're coming into my lane, get the F out of there. You know what I mean? No one could blame you for feeling that way. But instead, what if you just said, "You know what? If I can make somebody else in my car feel safer by just slowing down a little bit, giving a little bit of extra space, and go with the flow in that way, what's the harm in that?" Right? And that's one area that I've been trying to really practice going with the flow in areas that are not high stakes for me. It is not a big deal for me if I feel like I'm not following too close, but giving a little extra space. That is not going to change how I get there, how I'm driving. It's literally no skin off my back, and it's going to help somebody else out. And I'm trying to apply this same kind of logic even with my partner. Sometimes I'll have a very specific way that I want things to be done. Like right now we have got company staying at our house. There's lots of people around. And so we were getting ready to run some errands. And I told Dave, my boyfriend, I'm like, "Hey, can you just bring Brad upstairs with you? Because in my mind, if you take the dog upstairs, then I won't have to think about him at all as we're trying to get out of the house. I won't have to think, is he going to be in the way? We don't have to do the whole thing where it's like, hey, get back, or he's so excited he's running around us as we try to grab all the keys and the purses and all the things. It was just like, if he takes him upstairs, and that's one less thing that I have to manage. But of course, when I expressed this to Dave, if he were to be going with the flow, he would have just been like, "Fine, I'll take the dog upstairs with me. No big deal." He did not feel that way. Instead, he was like, "It's not a big deal. You're overthinking this. The dog could be downstairs or upstairs. He's just going to go take a nap when you get out of the house. It doesn't matter." And so instead of making that a thing, because I had the idea that the dog would go upstairs and that would be easier for me, I had already decided on that. Instead of forcing that outcome because I had already pictured it, instead I was like, "Fine, then I'll just let it be. It's not how I wanted it to, but is it really that big of a deal?" no, it really isn't that big of a deal. And it's like if we were to take everything that happens in a 24-hour period and we kind of go through the day of what we expected, what we thought we needed to get done, what was on our agenda, how we wanted it to go, and how hard we held to making sure it happened the way we initially thought versus what actually happened, maybe you can start to see all the ways that if you kind of surrender or even find places where it would have been nice if other people surrendered, it's a give and take, right? But here's the one thing that I know is that I cannot control other people. And even in all of these examples I've shared right now, I think of the ways that, like with my sister with the light, I could have not been the one to have her turn it back on, right? Or with Dave, if he could have helped me with the dog in that situation, that wouldn't have been a big deal for him either. But I cannot control other people. And I'm really trying to remember this as I move through my life. This is part of what I talked about last week with the process of self-validation. I can't make other people affirm my decisions in life. I can't make other people give me all the security and approval and validation that I seek to make me feel really good. I have to give that to myself. And I also have to be the one that is in charge of how I go with the flow. And some days are easier than others. Obviously, like I've been mentioning, we've had a lot of company in town, and this is why this topic has come up, is because when there's a lot going on, especially around family, for me, it is harder to go with the flow. But I went into this trip this weekend kind of knowing, okay, my sister, she's a little bit more of the one who wants to run the ship. And so, I also want to run the ship, but she's like the one who will beat me to the the ship steering place. Obviously, I'm not that acquainted with boat analogies, but you can picture what I'm saying. And so for me, I was able to kind of prepare for this, knowing that there's going to be a lot of times when she needs to have a plan, when she wants to be very busy. And I was kind of able to pre-plan it in my mind that not only was I going to be very busy over the last couple days, but I was really going to have to go with the flow. Because I don't know about you guys, but anytime there's company in town or anytime you're traveling and you have a lot on your agenda, one, sometimes you just can't fit as much in as you thought you could or as much as you want. Sometimes you can't account for how you're going to feel. Like maybe somebody comes down with a headache, or somebody gets too stressed out, or somebody needs to have a break, or somebody gets tired. These are all normal and natural things that are also unpredictable, that you can't always schedule for unless you know yourself really, really well. And maybe, like I mentioned with the Mercury retrograde, you kind of build it in just in case. But even then, what if you do and then you don't feel tired and then you've got this gap in your day, right? But I mention this because this is a really important time when you have to be willing to kind of surrender to what is. So I've been really working on going with a flow, and I will say the first couple days felt awesome because I just didn't have any reason to really try to control it. It wasn't taking a toll on me. I wasn't burned out. I was just having fun, just letting things happen. And I honestly had a really great time. We've done so many fun things. And then it was probably towards the end of the day yesterday that I just started to notice myself maybe not having as much of what I've needed, right? Like we all have our own needs and wants. And for me, I think I'm a pretty introverted person who doesn't love to have a million things on their agenda. I need time to recharge. And so I started to hit that top level of what I could take on. And I noticed myself starting to get a little bit short-tempered or a little bit less go with the flow, a little bit more on edge. And I noticed I'm like, I really need some downtime. I really need to meditate or journal or process some of this stuff. But I'm also trying to be so easygoing and go with the flow. I'm trying to control going with the flow. That's the point I hit because I got tired. And I think this happens for so many of us. It is much easier to go with the flow when we're actually taking care of our own needs and wants. If going with the flow means that we are sacrificing everything that we need to get by, then we're not actually going to be able to go with the flow for very long because we're going to actually be denying ourselves what it matters to us. And that's not healthy for anybody. So this idea of going with the flow, that then becomes very complicated because we're managing two things. We're managing the stuff that doesn't matter, that's easy for us to just surrender on. And then we're also having to take into account, are our needs getting met and are we able to show up how we need to? And both things matter equally in order for us to be able to go with the flow, right? It's like if we use that analogy I said at the beginning of being in a lazy river and on a raft, going with the flow means we have to be on that raft. And the raft is us having our needs and wants mostly met, right? Maybe not everything, but enough that is the raft that holds us up and keeps us going. If we don't have that and we try to go with the flow, we take our little raft out, we are having to be a body in this water, which maybe we are going with the flow, but it's still taking a toll on us. It's taking a toll on our body. It's taking a toll on our mind because we're having to switch back and forth and do this and that. We don't know where we're going and we're trying our best to keep up. And that is exhausting and it's not sustainable. So every single one of us, especially those who are, it's already less than natural to be in that process of surrender, to be relaxed about moving through life. It's important for us to really take constant check-ins with ourselves and say, okay, how can I come back to my own place of grounding here? Am I okay? What matters to me? What conversations do I need to be having? How do I need to make sure that I'm being seen here and that what I am wanting, the results that I need, are also in the picture? They're being accounted for because that matters too. And I really believe that when we have that good raft beneath us and we allow ourselves to as much as possible go with the flow, that is where real magic happens. And it's like, the more I think about this, the more I'm like, this is literally, it feels like magic. When you do not have to force things to happen in your life, you don't have to try so hard. You don't have to control every single detail. And then life can really surprise you. And I don't know about you, but when I think of the times in my life where things have just kind of happened because they were supposed to, whether that was, me getting certain jobs booked that were just divine, like they either were like the right price point that actually sustained me through that month financially, or they were at the exact place where a venue really needed somebody to help them do photography work, and then I was able to help them and they were helped by me. Or even when I think about my love story with Dave, like how everything lined up kind of perfectly in our lives. All these strange things had to happen over the course of many years to actually bring us together at the right moment in time where the timing was right for us to meet and fall in love and then start our life together. All of that only happened because I wasn't trying to control or force it. It wasn't like I had seen him and just knew I was going to be with him and walked up to him and said, hey, we're going to be together. If I would have done that, that would never have happened. And vice versa. Like he, honestly, in our love story, he had feelings for me first, more romantically. I was still kind of healing from a different breakup, and he was healing from a breakup too, but he just had that feeling about me. I didn't even have that awareness about him. And I know for a fact that if he would have pursued me in a way that it would have scared me off, it would have shut me down and I wouldn't have been open to it. And he was so patient. He just bided his time as my friend, just staying open and fortifying that friendship with me. And that allowed me to very, very slowly open that door as I was ready. And the timing worked out. And so when I think back to my life, all of the things that I've just worked out when I've just gone with the flow, it makes me so much happier because I'm like, I didn't have to do any work in order to have those things happen. There was, I had to participate. You can't just do nothing, right? You have to participate, but you don't have to overthink it. And usually when you do that, it turns out better than you can imagine. And this is such a good reminder for me in my own life right now because it's much harder to go with the flow and to surrender and to have trust when you are afraid. And there's so much in my own life right now that I feel so afraid of. And I'm just being honest when sharing that. I'm trying to transition my business. I'm trying to grow this new business. It's where my heart is. And I'm afraid of it not working out. And I'm afraid of what our future is going to hold and how it's all going to work out. And so I'm more apt right now to be shut down to the magic, shut down to the trust. But just because it's harder doesn't mean it's impossible. And so if you are anything like me, if you're having trouble believing in the things that could be magic in your life right now, maybe we take this moment just to take that deep breath and to really reflect on the things in our life that have happened because they were supposed to, and they happened even better than we could have imagined if we forced it or created it ourselves. And it's really hard, especially when it matters, especially when it's tugging on your heart, especially when it feels like the stakes are really high. But it is still possible for us to allow. So, if you have, your cup of tea or your coffee nearby, maybe we can just take a moment to just kind of cheers each other. Like, here's to going with the flow. Here's to the magic. Here's to the process of responsible surrender. Especially in the areas of our life that we are just feeling the most lost, the most fearful about, the most insecure about. It's like we're sending out this prayer into the universe, like, please let it all happen how it's supposed to, and let it have our best possible outcome in mind. For our highest good, may this all work out for us. And when we can move through life in big and small ways with that idea in mind that the entire universe is collaborating to support us, it becomes much easier just to enjoy the ride. And ultimately, it's a lot better for everybody. It's better for our relationships. It's better for ourselves. Of course, it's better for ourselves, and not just in our minds, right? Not just in our experience, but it's also better in our bodies, because living life in a state of stress is not good for our nervous system. It's not good for our physical health. We are actually much better equipped to move through life and deal with things when we are more relaxed, getting better sleep. Our whole body, our nervous system, our immune system, everything is functioning at its highest level. And we can't do that when we are really stressed. We have to be in that state of relaxation, which is why meditation, yoga, other mindfulness practices, taking time each day, getting out to nature, all of those self-care practices that we know work for us. That's why we have to participate them. We have to choose them. It's this full circle process. It all conspires for us to be healthy and wise and calm and to receive all of the good things. So before I start repeating myself again and again, I will close there, and let's close today with a card drawing. I've got the love and relationships deck, the affirmators deck, and we're just going to shuffle these cards and see kind of like what the universe has to say as the final stamp on this conversation. Warmth. I focus on warmth and let it guide all interactions. No matter how others behave, I choose to respond warmly. With warmth, I can melt any icy exterior. I can soften any hard feelings. I can microwave any pizza. Today, I adopt the saying, kill 'em with kindness, and turn myself into a warm and loving serial killer. Oh man, that always gives me the biggest smile on my face when these cards just perfectly conspire with our conversation. And I love this card, and I love what it adds to this conversation, this idea that, you know what, we can't control other people, but we can control ourselves. And when we're kind, when we're loving, when we treat others with warmth, when we choose that, we're choosing that path of least resistance. At first, there's a little bit of resistance because it's hard for us to retrain our minds. But eventually, it leads us to this place where we're having better feelings, we're functioning with more endorphins, we are in that place where our bodies are relaxed, our minds will start to relax, we'll be more willing to just go with the flow. So, here's to going with the flow. If you need more support in your life and you want to check out my TikToks or my Instagram, I'm on there as well every day, kind of helping to encourage self-love and self-kindness. I also have our website where you can buy some gentle yoga classes that I've taught, some meditations that can help support you with mindfulness and tuning inward. And of course, I'm also on Patreon where you can listen ad-free to the podcast. We've got multiple tiers that include meditation, yoga, and other things. I hope you have the best week ahead. Good luck as Mercury retrograde begins. Slow down, enjoy the full moon and lunar eclipse this weekend, and until next time.